Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. Today's episode is the second part in a conversation I had with John Kempf, who is an entrepreneur that started Advancing Eco Ag in 2006. John also hosts the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast for the past 6 years and is a pillar in the regenerative agriculture community. If you want to go and hear the first part of our conversation that we had, check out last week's episode about his philosophy on regenerative agriculture and the agricultural system in general. This week, we're going to dive a little deeper into his business philosophy and his journey in starting out at the age of 18, working in his dad's business that he developed his current business, Advancing Eco Ag, in, and also what he sees for the future of his business and some of the advice that he gives from his perspective on his journey along the way. I hope you enjoy this episode with John Kempf. There's also one more thing I just wanted you to note. If you're watching this on YouTube, we will not have video recording. John is from an Amish community, and out of respect for John and his beliefs and his community, we did not record the video version of this. So I just wanted to make you aware of that before getting into this interview. So, John, I want to switch directions here. We've had some really good discussions about the nuts and bolts of regenerative agriculture and the reasons for it. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what's on the minds of a lot of my audiences. They're looking at starting a business or just starting a business recently, and they're on this journey of business growth and ownership. And that it can be a wild ride. And as you stated before, you started yours when you were 18 with AEA and then taking it over fully and when you were 21. Could you share a little bit of what drove you to do that and some of your overall driving business philosophies that shaped how you developed your business?
Well, you don't ask any trivial questions now, do you? So I think I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to my parents, and particularly my father, who my father was also, he was a trailblazer. He was one of the first vegetable growers in our local community. He helped found a local produce auction. He helped to found a local Amish bank. He has pushed several community development initiatives. His entire life, he's always been pushing the boundaries and pushing community development, and he also created an environment at home for us where it was permissible to ask the question why, and to challenge why we were doing things a certain way, and to see if we could do them better. And it was really that context and that framework that, first of all, it shaped me as individually as the oldest child of the family, and it also created this environment where it was a safe environment to try new things and to possibly be mistaken. So it was that context is quite important, and it's worth pointing out that while I was able to incubate the business within my father's business in the early days before I reached the age of 21, in some ways that almost made it harder rather than easier from a cash flow perspective, because at age 21, because of a lack of financial management, or not financial management, but financial knowledge and skill sets. I came to the age of 21 with no personal financial resources and no credit rating. And now I was in a position where I needed to buy a significant amount of product inventory and assume cash flow responsibilities for an existing enterprise starting from zero. So that certainly was a struggle. And it remained a struggle for a number of years to manage cash flow extremely tightly, but it was character building, I suppose. And so when I think about, so those were some of the early days starting out. When I think about the philosophy, the approach of building a business, there are so many different directions I could take that question, but I suppose I'll begin with this, that there is this quote from Charlie Munger. Is it from Charlie Munger? And there's this quote that I've come to really appreciate. No, not from Charlie Munger. It's from Otto Scharmer. He says that the outcome of an intervention has nothing to do with the skills or the knowledge of the intervener. It has everything to do with the place within from which the intervener comes. So, and that is true. Anytime we try to influence someone or to change their mind or to give them a different perspective on any subject or topic, as trivial as trying to persuade my 4-year-old daughter to wear matched socks. When you think about what that means, just for myself personally, it means that my ability to persuade someone of how to manage plant nutrition better has nothing to do with what I know about agronomy. It has nothing to do with how good I am at debate or how good I am at sales or at selling someone. Instead, it has everything to do with the place that I'm coming from within. Do I really care about the person that I'm trying to help? Do I care about their challenges? Do I care about their problems? And am I able to show up internally in a way that they recognize that I care and are able to respond to that? You know, when I first started hosting my podcast half a dozen years ago, or whenever it was, one of my early episodes, I think it might be episode number 5, has proven to be one of the most popular episodes of all time. It's still one of the most popular episodes today. It was I interviewed Dr. Michael McNeil, who is one of my mentors. And Michael said things in that interview that, depending on who would have said them, many farmers would have found it to be very offensive, because he was very direct. He did not mince words. He said things like, "Stop poisoning your land." Some of the points that he made were impossible to misinterpret in a very direct way. But people loved it. People could hear what Michael had to say and perceive it and understand it. Why? Because early on in the conversation, it became very apparent that Michael cared deeply about farms and farmers. He is a farmer. He consults for a lot of farmers, and he cares deeply about them. He cares deeply about their farming operations. And because people could feel that he cared, he was able to say things that other people would never have been able to say, and they were able to hear it. They were able to perceive it. And that, I think, has been one of the fundamental things for me to realize and to deeply internalize, that our ability to persuade, our ability to inspire people has nothing to do with what we know. It has to do with how deeply we care about them. And when we can authentically come from a place of caring about them deeply within, then everything else just flows. It just goes. There's no need for special sales skills or persuasion skills or to have the most technical know-how, because when you are confident and you really care about them, the other thing about really caring for someone when you're seeking to support them or help them in some way is that you also have the authenticity to clearly and candidly communicate when you are not the right fit for them, or when your products are not the right fit for them. It's like it's really interesting in our work at AEA. We're still very much a consulting first company with products, pay the bills, and keep our lights on at this moment, although we're in the process of shifting that. But when an AEA agronomist makes a set of recommendations, it's common that only 30%, or somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% of the recommendations are for AEA products. The rest are for other companies' products or other products that we don't sell and don't distribute, because that is what is best for the grower. And that is what builds trust. That's what builds relationships.
Where did that come from for you? Have you had that ever since you started the business, or was that kind of a progression to get to that point and really have that mindset?
Well, it's certainly grown. I think the foundation of that, growing up in an Amish community with a Judeo-Christian worldview, and I also had the privilege of running a roadside vegetable stand from age 9 to age 14. I had a lot of fun with that. So I had a really great environment and a really great foundation. So the seed of that was always there at a subconscious level. But I think it's grown and evolved from realizing how important this is subconsciously to consciously being aware of it and consciously focusing on it. There have been days when, let's say I was in a situation where I needed to have a difficult conversation with someone, perhaps an employee or a vendor, customer, whatever the case would be. There's a need to have difficult conversations, and I'm upset about something, where I've needed to just take the time before a meeting to say, John, the way that you're feeling right now, if you approach a meeting coming from this place, the place within that you're feeling right now, will not result in the best outcomes for you or for anyone participating. You have to have an internal reset. And so being consciously aware of that rather than subconscious awareness, I think has been very powerful.
That was really good. So now, John, switching from the philosophy of what drives your business, I want to talk to you a little bit more about your business specifically and where it's going in the future, and also maybe some of the more specific steps that it took to get there. You said originally you had cash flow constraints. You dealt with those. I know along the journey you decided, I think, to take on some investment. What were the reasonings behind that? Is that something that you were, when hindsight, happy that you did? Did that really help you scale? Tell me the philosophy behind that.
Oh my, the philosophy is always to do the next thing next. And to just kind of do, what I mean by that is to just kind of, as a process of me growing as an individual, the organization growing organically. We didn't bring in any outside investment funding until, I think at this point, it's now roughly 2 years ago. We brought in some additional outside investment funding, and then more recently, we've just closed a community fundraising round, which was quite interesting, actually. And the initial, so the company existed and was successful, was growing at a fairly significant pace from the early days in 2006 up until we brought in our first round of investment funding. The reason for that, we wanted to continue to scale and grow a bit faster and more aggressively than we had been up to that point. I think at that point we were around 50 people, or between 50 and 60 people, if I recall correctly. And now it was interesting. One of the drivers, we've been continuing to grow and expand, and we have a number of endeavors internally within the company that we're investing in, including a new manufacturing facility in Denver, which is a significant scale up from our current facility in Northeast Ohio, or our former facility, I suppose I should say at this point, because we've been operating out of Denver for the last 6 months. But the community fundraising round was an interesting decision and choice, because in one of the main drivers and reasons for doing it was not just to raise money, but because when I think about regeneration from a first principles perspective, one of the foundational pieces that I believe needs to be regenerated is relationships at all levels, relationships between livestock and the landscape, relationships between plants and soil microbes, relationships between people and the landscape, and relationships between human organizations. And so as we grow as an enterprise, I wanted there to be this close forging of relationships between our employees and our customers and our supporters and advisors and even our vendors, where it is not just purely this transactional relationship, but that together collectively we are really vested in a common enterprise and the common good. And so over the years, we have explored different, as we've grown as an organization, I've explored different possibilities and options for the company to allow other people to participate in the company's growth. We've looked at stock options and things like that, which work for employees, but less so for farmers, customers, and other people outside the company. And so doing a community fundraising round was an administratively easy way for us to facilitate a pathway for employees and supporters and customers to participate in the company's growth and success. And it was a very elegant solution to be able to manage all those pieces. So that was the direction we chose to go down. We just closed, I think, a couple of weeks ago. We raised about $2.5 million in a community fundraising round, and we have significant momentum as an enterprise. Will we do other fundraising in the future? At some point, we need to provide an exit for the 2 investment rounds that we've now had, and as a rate to reward those people for their contributions. So that's still a piece that we're leaving to be figured out when we get to that bridge. We'll cross it when we get there, so to speak. But to your larger question of business approach, the vision for the enterprise has grown as I have grown, and today it is a vision of we don't expect to be all things to all people, but our unique role, what we can bring to the world, is we can be the front runner, the pace setter that forces other people to change the way they show up as a result of our presence in the marketplace, to do better agronomy, to be better agronomists, to use better data, to make more informed decisions, to produce better results for growers. That's really the role that we want to play.
Okay. And originally you started doing that through consulting and selling your own type of products that worked into the systems that you were promoting, right?
Yeah, we started as a consulting company only. But we would, with our focus on producing superior crop quality and yields and increasing disease and insect resistance, we would make recommendations for products that were, I have to remember, this would have been 2006, 2007. The marketplace hadn't developed nearly to the degree that it has now. So we would be making recommendations for products that contained cobalt and molybdenum and selenium and nickel, for example. And it was very difficult. Those recommendations would frequently never be executed and the product would never be applied because farmers had a hard time sourcing those types of products, those types of materials. So that resulted in us developing our own product line, and the business model that the marketplace understood and kind of demanded at the time was a model of selling products and giving away the consulting for free, because they were used to getting information for free and it was worth the price they were paying for it in many cases.
Would agree with that.
So that was the business model that we have largely used since then, but we started shifting a couple of years ago back to doing more consulting that is disassociated from products. And I would like to finish a transition here over the next, 12 to 18 months, let's say, where we, instead of providing discounted consulting based on product sales, I would like to offer discounted product sales based on consulting. In other words, I want to have the products be discounted and not to have the consulting be discounted, because the consulting is where a great deal of value resides. But that perception of value needs to be more pronounced and more clear, both in the minds of our customers as well as in the minds, most importantly, of our internal team. Because as our team grows and we're constantly onboarding new people, training them, there needs to be a clear recognition of responsibility for the value that they need to deliver to the grower from the consulting perspective.
Yep, that makes sense. And I had heard on another podcast in preparing for this interview that you also were looking at moving to more of a technology-based approach to your consulting. Is that correct?
Yes, we're constantly developing software and developing tools to make people better. And this is a very important distinction. I think there is a lot of software, and not just software, but technological development tools that are being developed today that are seeking to replace people. Mm-hmm. And I'm of the persuasion that there is not a good replacement. There are overlays. So if you do drone mapping and looking at different wavelengths and different crop scouting technologies that are out there, there are certainly ways of creating visibility into things that a human cannot perceive as easily. But there is still an intuitive sense that the very best crop scouts, the very best farmers and farm managers routinely will walk into a block or walk into a field and just say, something feels off here, and be unable to pinpoint exactly what it is that they're perceiving or why they perceive that. But they feel that something isn't quite right. The same thing, you're a dairyman, the same thing happens with livestock. Something is off with this cow. I don't know exactly what, but something is off. And so I'm of the persuasion that the way to develop software is to help make people better and to guide them when they're doing crop scouting, to collect better data, to ask better questions, to make better observations. And so we are intent. We have now, over the last 18 years, we've developed this very remarkable and very reliable approach to how we make agronomic recommendations. And a great deal of that can be digitized, where it can be, if any grower anywhere in the world collects similar laboratory data and puts it into the platform and partners that laboratory data with field observations of disease, insect pressure, weed pressure, and so forth, you can approximate over 90% of what a really good consultant can develop. And so then these software tools can be tools for facilitating better observations in the field and facilitating better recommendations, where it should be possible for a grower to get a set of recommendations that says, hey, your crop in this particular field has a higher susceptibility rating to this disease or this insect. And if you want to lower your susceptibility rating, you can accomplish that by putting on a foliar application of magnesium and sulfur and molybdenum and boron. And here is why. These are the mechanisms. Here's what's going on in your crop. And this is why this would result in lowering the susceptibility. That's a very powerful tool, because it completely changes the nature of the conversation away from pesticide applications to nutrition management for prevention. And you can prevent it with the technology that we now have. We can predict disease and insect susceptibility 3 to 4 weeks into the future based on a crop's nutritional profile. And that means we'll also have the ability to prevent or to reduce that susceptibility and prevent the disease or insect from ever showing up in the first place. And we have a rapidly growing team. We're at around 80 people at this point. But the good news, even with an amazing team of 80 people, there's still a finite limit to how many farmers and how many acres you can support.
Yeah.
And the value of digitizing that knowledge base and translating it into software is that information now becomes accessible to a much larger group of people. And the output of that software, the set of recommendations, can still be and should be reviewed by humans. Again, the purpose is to make humans better, not to replace them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also allows you to see, when you collect that data, it allows you to see more trends and things that you might not see on a one-on-one basis, right? Is that something that you're looking at doing with it?
Absolutely. It's inherent within the way we're designing it. Yep.
You had mentioned a few minutes ago about asking questions. For you and your consultants that you work with in your business, what's the importance of asking really good questions?
Oh, it's fundamental.
I think that's an art that we've kind of lost in society today.
Well, there is, in today's world, with Google and technology and Google Scholar at our fingertips, there's relatively little value, or I shouldn't say little, there's a great deal less value in knowing the answers as there was a couple of decades ago. Today, it's not most valuable to know the answers. It's most valuable to be able to ask the right questions and to try to understand root causes. One of my colleagues he had this motto tagged onto every email, and he would often begin and end a meeting by asking the question, what is the question I should be asking? And that one really makes you think. And, I've learned it is important to try to understand root causes, foundational causes, and approach problems from a perspective of first principles thinking. Because when you are able to get to the root cause and derive solutions from first principles thinking, your solutions are going to frequently be very different from the mainstream knowledge and often be much more elegant and much better, and really solve the problem permanently. And that's a key phrase in agriculture. When you think about it, how many pesticides solve the problem permanently?
They never do.
Zero.
Yeah.
Not a single. In fact, they exacerbate problems over the long term, over a timeline of a horizon of years. And that is how amazing is it that we can have fields that are infested with Canadian thistle or quackgrass or various different diseases or various different weed problems, and we change the nutritional microbiome of that soil, and that weed population vanishes. Mm-hmm. And there's just the same is true of, and much more easy, in fact, for diseases and insects. Like, you can truly prevent something from being a problem, not just this year, but once you've really established a strong foundation, indefinitely into the future. How incredible is that?
Yeah, that's the power of it, huh? So, John, to wrap up our interview here today, what do you see agriculture being like a decade from now? You really started your business, 10, 15 years ago. It's changed a lot over that period of time. Where do you see it going in the next decade? Is it going to be purely commodity driven, or is there going to be a transition to different standards of value coming out of what we produce as farmers?
Well, if you want to know how I would have answered that question a decade ago, I actually I was asked to give a presentation. I forget which YouTube channel it's on, but it's pretty easy to find. I was asked to give a presentation on agriculture in 2040. I think the presentation was in Massachusetts. It might be the Bionutrient Food Association or the Real Food Campaign. I'm uncertain which channel it's on, but that information is certainly out there. I was really right about some things, and I was equally wrong about some things, as you would expect, since I don't have a perfect crystal ball.
Yeah, 30 years out is kind of a long perspective.
Yeah. It's interesting. I have a lot less certainty around that question today than I would have. Well, first of all, I do think from an actual growing and production perspective, regenerative agriculture is going to become mainstream in the next couple of decades, or even in the next decade and a half. I expect by 2040 it'll be mainstream, for a number of very good reasons. But the big one is that economic incentives supersede all other incentives, and there are significant economic incentives for regen ag right now. So while it is more management intensive and has a number of there's a learning curve, and people dislike change. There's many strikes against it, but economic incentives supersede all others given enough time. And so I expect that to happen. But how exactly that's going to happen, and I've become very aware of the outsized impact that policy has, particularly in the U.S., on the direction of agriculture and agricultural development. And I've become increasingly aware that policy is not written for the benefit of farmers, even though we think it has that appearance on the surface, but it's really written for the benefit of Cargill and ADM, Conagra, the big meat packers. I mean, the reality is we have a functional monopoly situation in almost every aspect of major food production and processing of all the commodities. And I would suggest that one of the biggest things that is stifling innovation and stifling entrepreneurship in our agricultural communities, and that is stifling economic flows to those communities and regenerating the capacity for stewardship, is the regulatory burden that limits market access. It is comparatively much easier for a large meat processor or meat packer to comply with a significant regulatory burden as it is for a smaller scale processor. And I'm just using that as one example. But the reality is that those effective monopolies could not exist if it were easier for entrepreneurs to get into the landscape and to play the game. If it were easier for entrepreneurs to get into the landscape and to facilitate market access, then I think we could see a very different food and supply chain landscape evolve over the next decade. But a lot of that is going to be determined by collective political will rather than by farmers themselves, or at least those farmers, until farmers are able to work collectively more effectively than they've been able to up to this point.
Yeah, I actually just had a podcast episode about that, the impact of policy and how that really can change what direction agriculture goes pretty drastically, one way or another, very suddenly.
Yep.
Well, good. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention about your journey, your business journey as you've grown up? That would be words of wisdom for anyone starting out today.
Oh, there are many. I would direct people to my website on my blog at johnkempf.com. I have one of the blog posts that's been very popular that I got asked for a lot to put together was my recommended reading list. And the recommended reading list is understandably focused on regenerative agronomy and what good agronomy would look like. But I'll put out for consideration a couple of books that have really had an impact on me and the way that I approach situations. People often give the cliched answers of books that have helped develop them. At least I think they're cliched, of Dale Carnegie or Zig Ziglar or The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And obviously those work for some people, so kudos for them, but they were not a fit for me at all. Two books that had a significant impact on me. One of them was titled Secrets of the Millionaire Mind by T. Harv Eker. And the book is not about money. It's about psychology. And the more of an aversion you have to the title, the more necessary it is for you to read it. So it was a very powerful book that completely shifted and changed the way that I think about managing money and influence in the world. And then the second book that I'll put out for consideration is Power versus Force by David Hawkins. And it's a reflection, again, perhaps a more nuanced reflection of the comments that I was sharing earlier regarding Michael McNeil and the place that you come from within. But we all know people who appear to have less activity in their life, but they are remarkably effective. So they're not busy, but they're very effective. People come to them, deals come to them, opportunities come to them. It's just things flow and they are able to have an impact on the world around them that is completely out of proportion to what you might expect by just looking at the surface. And that is a reflection of people's level of consciousness, their level of influence, that is a result of the place that they come from within.
Well, those sound like two books that are going on my reading list. So I haven't read either one of those, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks so much, John, for being on here. I really appreciate it. And your podcast, Regenerative Agriculture Podcast, audience, go listen to that. It's a great podcast. I've been listening to it for about 5 or 6 years now. And then, as you said, your website is
johnkempf.com.
Great. Well, thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening once again to the AgCulture Podcast. I really hope you enjoyed both last week's episode and this week's episode with John Kempf. It was a pleasure to be able to speak with him. I really enjoyed the conversation that we had and that we were able to make it into 2 separate episodes focusing on 2 different areas of his expertise and his journey as an entrepreneur in agriculture. So as always, please like, subscribe, rate, and review the AgCulture Podcast and share this with anyone that you think would get value out of this. And again, I want to thank John for coming on and opening up with us his journey of entrepreneurship in agriculture. Until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller, and this has been the AgCulture Podcast.